Good morning to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com, here with your Hurricane Pro and HD video blog for the 11th day of July 2013. What's going on out in the tropics today? Well, not a whole heck of a lot, especially now that Chantal has been reduced to just a tropical wave out here in the southwest Atlantic. Really not much more than just a blob of clouds. 20% chance of development, and you kind of have to look at this as if it was just a tropical wave that we would be watching normally that would traverse its way across the Atlantic here and wind up in the southwest part of the Atlantic basin, and we say, hey, I wonder if that's going to develop. Don't think of it as the leftovers of Chantal anymore, but more of a tropical wave that we're keeping an eye on because conditions are changing and they've become unfavorable for development. And, as I'm going to show you in just a moment, the wave energy itself is starting to split, and I can show you a little bit of evidence of that in just a minute and what that might mean. First, a satellite animation of the area, and you can see that there's really not much going on in terms of banding features with it. No organization starting to fire back up. There's still a little bit in the way of heavy rainfall. Now, part of that is because of the wave energy spread out over a large area, and it has definitely slowed down. Remember, it was racing across, and now it's just kind of hit a roadblock here, if not a brick wall entirely, and really started to slow down, and that might help it develop if it can hold together. Part of the energy, I think, is going to come up into here and eventually affect Florida, but more of just scattered showers and thunderstorms and increase in moisture than anything else. The other part of the wave energy may come across this way and have to be watched as it gets into the Gulf of Mexico next week, but we'll worry about that later. You can tell too, if you look closely, you see the upper level winds going across here. See these clouds streaking across? Especially if I speed the animation up, you can really see that. Pretty good area of clouds just kind of moving across the system, and that's indicative of that wind shear in the upper levels. You see how these clouds are moving away. A little bit of a fanning out to them, but overall the upper level winds not supportive of this thing developing any further, and that's why it's as weak as it is. Over the southeast United States, a stalled or almost stalled out frontal boundary, and that'll tap into all this juicy air sitting off the Atlantic and pumping into the southeast from that Bermuda high to create a pretty wet weekend across a good part of the southeast, off and on showers and thunderstorms, and even some very heavy rain in some locations. So let's look at the vorticity for the Atlantic Basin, the 850 millibar vorticity chart, 5,000 feet in the atmosphere or so. And you can see now Chantal looks like a tadpole. See? And that's pretty much the extent of it. It's less round with concentrated vorticity or spin, and now it's more oblong in shape, and the energy is stretched out over a larger area. And I think that part of this energy will head off towards Florida, and part of it will break off and head towards the Yucatan Channel, and eventually the Gulf of Mexico over here. And it might try to develop over there. We'll see. None of the computer models very robust and enthusiastic about that. Another area out here in the open tropical Atlantic near the Cape Verde Islands, you see this vorticity is also stretched out, really not very well organized or concentrated. It too in the shape of a tadpole rather than a round tropical cyclone or a round bundle of energy in this case. So that's good news. None of these systems looking very well organized. It still is an active pattern for July, where out in this part of the Atlantic Basin, pressures are the highest this time of the year. In fact, if we look at a global shot here, at least a hemispheric shot, a nice shot of the Earth, this part of the tropics and really the Atlantic Basin dominated by a strong high pressure in the month of July. The pressures reach their peak over the Atlantic Basin this time of year, and it's not until August and September, as you know, that these pressures start to relax some, and the intertropical convergence zone, which right now, and that's the area where the trade winds from the southern hemisphere meet the trades from the northern hemisphere, is suppressed pretty far to the south right there, pretty active along parts of the eastern Pacific, but fairly strong surface high pressure nosing its way down, squashing the intertropical convergence zone not allowing a lot of moisture to filter in and feed these tropical waves as they come off and begin their migration to the west. It's just not that time of year yet. It's like a very, very large pot that takes a long time to boil. In fact, if we look at the climatology map, for the next 10 days of July that we're starting to move through now the 11th through the 20th here, this is the time of year where we actually see less activity than the prior 10 days that we just went through. Nothing in this 10-day time frame has formed east of 40 degrees of longitude. Nothing in the last 100 years. Nothing in the Caribbean Sea, and only 3 development areas in the Gulf of Mexico. Yes, there's been a little bit of a conglomeration right here between 45 and 60 degrees of longitude, a few spots in the Caribbean, and a few systems that develop probably from frontal sources or upper level lows, things like that. More likely in El Nino years, quite honestly. 1997 added a few out here, but the East Pacific is the most active during this 10-day time frame of any given hurricane season, your average hurricane season. Looking at the Madden-Julian oscillation, this is an interesting piece of forecasting tool. I'll zoom in on it with our camera here to show you what's what. Interestingly enough, right now the MJO situated right there. When it gets close to the circle here, the best way to describe this and explain it is that it's losing its amplitude. It's losing its ability to be seen, really. The energy and the tropical convection, the upward motion pulse, starts to wane when you see the Madden-Julian oscillation getting close to and into the circle. The strength of it starts to really wane away, and you see over the next couple of weeks none of the models indicating very much MJO activity. It does hang around in phases 2 and 3, which favors the Atlantic Basin and upward motion over Africa coming out of the Indian Ocean, but we're not looking at a strongly amplified MJO. Notice when it was fairly amplified over here in phases 8 and 1, that's when we had the burst of activity that included a couple of hurricanes in the eastern Pacific. Notice, too, that even though the MJO is currently favoring the Atlantic Basin and Indian Ocean area, we do have a typhoon in the western Pacific. And for those of you that follow that in the Hurricane Pro and Hurricane HD apps, that typhoon headed for China, and it's in the western Pacific, even though the Madden-Julian oscillation not technically favoring that area, just goes to show that you don't always have to have a favorable upward motion pattern to get tropical cyclone development to occur. So that's a look at the tropics for today. Chantal and its remnants really not much of an issue any longer, and that's a good thing. It might bring still some heavy rains, a few gusty wind periods into the Bahamas and southeast Florida over the next couple of days, but regeneration into a tropical storm, and certainly not a hurricane, really doesn't seem likely, and the weekend ahead looks pretty good for areas down in the southeast and in Florida, so no problems there. I will be off tomorrow, Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday as well. I'm going to be out of town doing something not hurricane related for once, so it's a good thing that things are nice and quiet. We won't be missing anything, and then I'll be back on Monday, and we'll see what the week ahead has at that point in time. So have yourselves a good weekend when it gets here. Enjoy it. Don't worry about the tropics too much. Maybe glance once in a while at the app and see what's going on with updates, the tropical weather outlook, etc. But beyond that, things should stay nice and quiet. All right? I'll see you again on Monday. Again, I'm Mark Sudduth. HurricaneTrack.com is my site. Always an honor to do these videos for you on Hurricane Pro and HD. Have a good rest of the Thursday time frame and the weekend ahead, and I'll be back with more for you on Monday.